Welcome back. In this video, we are going to implement and use DEXTER, which is an Android library that simplifies the process of requesting permissions at runtime. And we have seen before that it can be quite some work to implement that, but that's exactly where DEXTER comes in. It really helps us to make this a lot quicker. So you can, of course, check out this website, github.com/karumi/dexter, if you want to know all about it, because here are a bunch of examples of how to use single permissions, multiple permissions, and how to handle errors and so forth. And yeah, I would recommend to check that out. We're going to use some of that functionality. So let's dive right into it. And what we're going to do is, by the way, we're going to add this screen here, which allows us then to ask for permissions. I already gave the permission for this app, so let's see how we can implement that. So the first thing we need to do is to add an on-click listener for our button, which is our TV add image button. And it's going to be this. So this class, which is our add happy place activity, will be the on-click listener because, well, it implements the functionality here, or it extends it. Okay, so then, of course, we need to add the ID here as well. So r.id. And here it was IV place image. So if that is the view that was clicked on, then what do we want to do? Well, first of all, I want to have this little alert dialog here with two options. All right, so let's add that alert dialog. So val picture dialog, as I'm going to call it, is going to be an alert dialog. And I'm going to use the builder to build it. So builder with this as the context. Okay, and then I can set the title of that dialog with the set title method here. And I'm gonna say select action. And then I need to have the different picture dialog items. At least that's how I'm gonna call them. Picture dialog items, which is going to be an array of two values. So we have select photo from gallery, and then the other option is capture photo from camera. All right, so these are the two options, and now I can go ahead and use that picture dialog in order to set the items that it should display, and it's going to be the picture dialog items. And then what do I want to do with it? Well, depending on the dialog which was selected, I want to run some code. So depending on which, I want to run code. Okay, so we have two options. Number 0 will be select photo from gallery, and number 1 will be capture photo from camera. So what I want to do here is, for 0, I want to run some code, and for 1, I also want to run some code. But here I'm just going to use a toast, so toast make text, which will be displayed for a certain amount of time. And then, of course, I want to show this dialog. So picture dialog dot show. Now, what is it that I want to run if we choose the functionality photo from gallery? Well, I want to run a method here, or method call choose photo from gallery. And that one will, of course, need to be created. So let's create another function here, private fun choose photo from gallery. And this one will, of course, then later on allow us the permission or ask for the permission, whether we may even use a photo from the gallery and so forth. So we, of course, need to ask for permissions. So let's go to the permission file, which is our manifest. And here, add a bunch of permissions that we're going to need. And I'm going to use multiple ones, so I'm just going to paste them in here. So what I will use is the permission to read external storage, write external storage, and camera. All right, and then I told you that we would use DEXTER. Okay, so in order to use DEXTER, we need to go to our build Gradle and then add this library here. So include the library in the build.gradle implementation karumi dexter 601. So I'm just going to add that here and then click sync now here at the top right hand corner. Once that is done, we can now use DEXTER. So now we can go back to our happy places and use DEXTER in order to ask for permission. So here, DEXTER, and then I need to import this class here, import DEXTER. All right, now it's available. Let's look at the imports real quick. You can see now I'm using the com.karumi.dexter.dexter. And now I can go ahead and use DEXTER's functionality. So here, for example, the method with activity. So I need to pass in the activity. Then I go ahead and ask for permissions. So which permissions do I want to use? Well, you can see a permission string is what I'm asked to provide. So manifest.permission.read underscore external underscore storage. And here, of course, it's easier if you enter manifest correctly and then import manifest. And I'm going to import the Android manifest. Then separated by comma my other permission that I want to ask for. So manifest dot permission dot write external storage. And then I can go ahead and add the listener. So with a listener, and here, by the way, we can just follow his instructions. And for us, what's interesting is this multiple permissions, because we are already asking for multiple permissions, right? So what we need is a new multiple permission listener. All right, even though it's done like this here, what we can do is we can use a different one. So I'm just going to copy this. And what we're going to do is we are going to pass the object of the multiple permission listener in here. Okay, so it's instead of using the new keyword, I'm using an object of type multiple permission listener here. And by the way, it's complaining here because I forgot the S here, because there is another called or another with called or method with permissions. So that's why it was complaining about this write external storage. Now it's going to work. And here, because I'm passing in the object, I don't need the brackets here. And this additional bracket here at the end as well. Because the code is, of course, Android, because the code is Java code. So we need to make some more changes. So here, override. And then I'm using the fun here. So override fun on permission checked. Then we pass in the multiple permission report. So what I'm doing here is really just bringing it in the right format. And we need to import that as well. So multiple permissions as well as the permission request. We need to import that as well. And we're going to use the one from DEXTER. So here we have a list of permissions. So permissions colon, and that will be a mutable list. So we can change the list of permissions later on. So mutable list of permission requests. And then we need a token, which is going to be a permission token. So token colon permission token. And then we need to import permission token as well. All right. And that's already it. Now we of course need to implement the code that we want to run when the permission is checked and when the permission rationale should be shown. And by the way, you also saw how easy it is to adjust the code from being Java code to becoming Kotlin code. So here, instead of the new keyword, we use the object that we pass in of type multiple permissions listener, and then, well, you can see what it does, and then you can see that it calls the check method. So now we can of course implement those two. And what do we want to do there? Well, let's start with the first one. So with this report, And I'm going to do it like this. Now I can read everything here. So I'm going to say if report exists and all permissions are granted, so report all permissions granted, then I want to run a toast in there. Okay, so here this will be a toast dot make text and so forth. Okay, so I want to inform the user. So here I'm just gonna say storage read write permissions are granted. Now you can select an image from gallery and the toast will be displayed very quickly or only shortly. So this will be called if the permissions are checked, and then we see if all permissions are granted, then we execute this code. Now what shall happen if the rationale should be shown? So if we need to tell the user why we need it, because he maybe pressed no or something like that, well, then I will show another method. So I'm going to create a specific method which is just going to be there in order to let the user know. And I'm going to call this method show rational dialog for permissions. Okay, now let's implement this method here. So private fun, and what I want to display there is an alert dialog. So alert dialog builder with this as the context. Set the message to be it looks like you have turned off permissions required for this feature. It can be enabled under application settings or under the application settings. All right, so this is just an example of what you could display. Of course, you can write a very different text if you want, but generally that is what we will do. So show rationale for permission. Then we need to set the positive button. So set positive button. How should the text be? Well, the text should be go to settings. So if the user presses yes or the positive buttons, so this go to settings button, then I want to send the user to the settings. Okay, and how I do that is the following code. So I'm going to paste it in here. So we have two variables that we are passed, but we are not using them. So we can just use underscore here. By the way, we could have done that somewhere else as well. So here, for example, we're not using dialog, so we could have just used underscore because we're never using it. Okay, this is just an example. Then we try to run a certain intent. Why do we try it? Well, because it could go wrong. So we run an intent called settings application details settings. And what we're using here is we're passing the URI as well, which is the URI of our package name. So what we want this to do is send the user to the application settings where you can directly change the user rights or the permissions. All right, and then we add this data to the intent, the URI, and we start the activity with this intent. And of course, as this could go wrong, we have a try and a catch surrounding it. And for example, the error that could arise is the activity not found exception. All right, so this is what should happen if the user presses the positive button. And now what should happen when the user sets the negative button or clicks the negative button? Well, then I want this, or by the way, I want this button to be saying cancel as the text. And here why it's important which set negative button you use, because in some cases it accepts it, in others it doesn't. So you need to have the one where it accepts it, and you can see dialog and which, and we're going to use the dialog.dismiss here. Okay, so as I said, which is never used, so we can rename that to an underscore. And of course, if we want to display our whole alert dialog, we need to add this show here. And before we test that, there are two minor things that I still need to change. And one of them is that when it comes to this on permission rationale should be shown, and actually this with listener, when you want to run that, what you need to add is this on same thread. So here we before just had check. So here like this dot check, and what we actually need to do is on same thread dot check. Okay, so this is the one line. And then another thing, when testing, I realized that I'm not using the right ID here. So I'm using IV place image, but it should be TV add image. Okay, so it's super important that you use the correct names here. When entering this, I accidentally entered the wrong name. So let's test this again. There we are. Let's click on add image, and you can see we can select action. So select photo from gallery. You can see we are asked for permission. I'm going to deny it. I'm going to click once again. And you can see it says it looks like you have turned off permissions required for this feature. It can be enabled under the application settings. Okay, let's click on go to settings. You can see it goes to the app info directly. And here we can go to permissions and go to camera, for example, allow camera, or here no permissions allowed, and we asked for storage, so let's allow storage here. We can also allow camera here if we want to. So now later on it will not ask us again. Okay, going back from here, and from here leads us back to our application, and now when clicking it we should get to the point where we can actually select the image. And by the way, if you were wondering why it didn't show this toast that we created if all permissions are granted, because currently all permissions are granted, that has to do with this multiple permissions report not being annullable. So we need to make this annullable, and then we can run this again, and then it will work. So that is something that is tricky. That is something that you probably wouldn't come up with yourself, because what we did in this part of the code is we translated his Java code into Kotlin code. And then of course it's not obvious to use nullables here. Okay, but now you know that's what this course is for, at least to a certain degree. So you see these things as well, and you can use it in the future. So let's click on it, and you can see storage permissions are granted. Okay, so let's have a quick look at what we did. So what we needed to do is we needed to go to our manifest. We needed to add the permissions in here. Then we added something to our Gradle. So this line here, com kurumi dexter 601, we synced this file, and then we could go ahead and use his functionality. So we needed to import it, of course. We added the on-click listener for our button so that it does something. And when we click on that button, we opened a picture dialog. At least we called this dialog like this, and we gave two options. One of them being select the photo, the other one was capture the photo. And then if we click on select the camera or capture the photo, then we currently just show a text here. And otherwise we call this function called choose photo from gallery, which we create ourselves, in which we then finally use DEXTER, which is this library that we're using here. And we use multiple permissions, in this case the read and write permissions, and we set the multiple permissions listener. And there are two on options, or two on functions, which are called. One is when the permissions are checked, and one is if the permission rationale should be shown, which means the user said no. And in this case, what we do is we call our own alert dialog, where we tell the user that it's really important that we need those settings to be active, so those permissions to be active, otherwise we cannot run the functionality of the application. And then what we do is we send him to the application settings, which is pretty useful. So this is something that you really might need in multiple of your applications, so that's really something that you should keep in mind. All right, and if the user says no, then we just dismiss the dialog. All right, cool. So that's a very important step, because now you have seen how to use a third-party library, which we have not used before. Okay, so I'd say let's go to the next video where we're going to implement the further features. So see you there.